Welcome back to Keto and Crime and Thought Crime. Today I have part 2 of Rise of Zion, Book 3 in Vallow-Daybell's Standing on Holy Ground series. Before we get into that, though, I want to say really briefly, thank you to my channel members and patrons. If you'd like to join them, those links are below. Also, the best thing you can do for the channel is subscribe, like, comment, share. If you haven't subscribed, I hope today's the day I earn your subscription. If you have been subscribed, check to make sure you're still subscribed because there has been some shenanigans. I really appreciate all the support. Also, I have new merch in my store. I'll link that right up here if you would like to check that out. And other than that, thank you so much. I love you all. I really appreciate you hanging out with me every week, going over these stories. We've got a great winter coming up. In addition to finishing out this book series, I'm going to talk about the Martha Stewart White Collar Crimes. I'm going to talk about Ruby Ridge. I've got child serial killer Mary Bell coming up, and a lot of really awesome stuff. And also I take requests. So if you have any requests for cases you'd like me to cover, drop them down below. And with that being said, let's get back into part 2, Rise of Zion. So Doug and 400 saints from Washington, D.C. are on their way to New Jerusalem. Meanwhile, we cut to New Jerusalem to a recycling plant, an original recycling plant that was built on the outskirts of Kansas City, now being used by the citizens of New Zion, or New Jerusalem, Zion, to actually melt down all kinds of scrap metal into new usable metal. And working there is Jonas. Remember Jonas from the first 2? He was the CHIP authority officer that tried to arrest Tad, and then he went in as a plant to kind of help lead Shemer's men in to destroy the Mormons at, I believe it was Manti. And then he turned, and now he's been part of the New Zion community. Well, he's working there, and we get to see what he's doing. They're melting down cars because evidently cars are not a thing widespread right now. They actually go get these cars, and they pull them in with horses with one man sitting behind the steering wheel. And they're melting down old CDs. And he talks about melting down the greatest, Motley Crue's greatest hits, Def Leppard's greatest hits, High School Musical Part 3. Okay, this was definitely 2009. And a CD by David Archuleta, who was a Mormon teenager to do pretty well on American Idol. Anyway, so they're melting down all these things. And then Jonas is evidently the supervisor. He was Zion worthy. That's actually a term that Daybell uses. And then they get to Sunday night, where he is joining Tad North and family for dinner. And believe it or not, Tad has yet to tell Emma and the rest of his family that Jonas was originally trying to arrest him. And they had become quite close, and David, their oldest son, works with Jonas at the recycling plant, so they've all become really close, and Tad just hasn't found it in his heart to tell him he used to be evil. And so they were sitting around having a conversation about Salt Lake City. 12-year-old Leah asks, "Hey, what about Salt Lake City? It's been like 2 years since we heard anything, so I guess another year has passed." Somehow, time is crawling for me with this book, but evidently for them, it's just flying by. But anyway, basically, Tad, who is well-placed, tells them that, according to their spies, Shireen, remember Larry Campbell, the pot calling the kettle religious zealot, is still in charge, still in command of Salt Lake City. He still lives in the Capitol building. He has approximately 5,000 people under his control. Whether they are actually under his complete control or they're just scared, we don't know. But he and his band of merry criminals has Salt Lake City locked up. And then they go talking about David starting classes at BYU Zion. And this is where we get the very in-depth description of how BYU Zion is operating. Basically, the only people there that are upperclassmen right now are people that had gone to one of the other BYU branches, whether it's Provo, Salt Lake City, Hawaii, or wherever. Those are the only records that they've maintained. Everybody else's college records were lost. So if you want a college education, it's BYU Zion. The majors are very niche. It's definitely to do a lot with things that would benefit Zion. So you can't go there and major in, I don't know, hairbrush studies or underwater basket weaving or anything outside the norm of what they consider proper education. Again, way to put forth the theory of a very authoritarian type government as being best for everyone. So we've got government-controlled media, we've got government-controlled education, and government-controlled entertainment vectors, and shared wealth. Sounds very much like the Soviet Union there, Chad. So yeah, way to go on lambasting American government for trying to do their best they can from keeping Wall Street to crashing to this. Again, Chad, plot holes. Plot holes. But anyway. And so, meanwhile, a neighbor called. So evidently they have government church-run telephones. Or they called them on Zoom. Who knows? And yes, the prophet has indeed passed away. So that president that Chad said he hoped was around for a long, long time, the one he based this president on, done died. Done killed him off. And then we get to see how they choose the next prophet or the next president. So 14 of the living apostles, so I guess there was 15, were gathered in the prophet's modest home. They spoke quietly with Josh and the other apostles, and they gave him his final blessing. And they closed his eyes on his bed because evidently he was laying there with his eyes open. And the next day they had his funeral. And then the 14 remaining apostles gathered together in one of the smaller community temples that had recently been dedicated, and a senior apostle conducted the meeting. And it was proposed that they would appoint the next president of the Mormon Church. I guess this is kind of like the Catholic Church with the College of Cardinals appointing the next pope. I doubt that they watch for the smoke, but still. And basically they say that God pointed them to a man of high stature, a very revered man. And Josh felt the burning confession of the Holy Spirit within his thing saying that this is the one, and they decided he was going to be the next prophet, but they don't name him. They never name him. The prophet and the president of the Mormon Church in these books is never named. So we don't know exactly who this very revered man is. We just know that he's a revered man, and this is the next president. And so it talks about the ceremony to anoint him. Very long, drawn out. This took up like a chapter and a half. But basically, he sits in a chair surrounded by the other 13 apostles who basically consecrate him, walk around him, do this kind of ceremony, and basically make him the new prophet. Then he gives a speech talking about how Joseph Smith laid the principles of this government and actually implemented it in Nauvoo during the last years of his life. He designed it to include and represent all people, whether they're Latter-day Saints or not. We, the apostles, he said, will still be at the head of this ecclesiastical portion of the kingdom, but we won't be serving as the governing officers of the kingdom. The main governing body will be composed of men and women known as the Council of 50, so kind of a Congress. So, okay. And then we will establish it first here in New Jerusalem, and it will be implemented for all other cities across Zion, which I guess is the new name of the United States from Chad Daybell's. And then he said, we have a lot to do. I sense that the prophecies of Revelation and the prophecies of the Book of Mormon are coming true, and that we are edging ever closer to Armageddon and the no, I guess the invasion of the United States wasn't technically Armageddon, but they're etching ever closer to Armageddon and the second coming of Christ. Oh, and another rule. They felt that the dark suits that the apostles wore were too reminiscent of Wall Street corruption before the coalition invasion. And so they have decided that going forth, they will wear white suits. So they all wear white suits now. It's all fun and games till you spill the ragu, Chad. Anyway, then we cut to Mark and Michelle Dalton. These are Doug and Emma's parents. They have been serving as missionary guards at the Provo Temple. They are still there, so evidently Provo is part of the suburbs of New Jerusalem. Actually, no, Provo is still in Utah, so that's totally incorrect, but it's still part of this whole Mormon network. And at times, they wish they could be with their family in New Jerusalem, but they feel they have a very important purpose to serve. They are watching satellite broadcast of the new prophet's first speech, and upon hearing the prophet's speech about preparing for the second coming and preparing to dedicate the temple, and they needed the gold to finish the temple, Mark felt that it was now his mission to bring the gold that will finish the temple. And then it cuts back to him and his friend Gary, who actually know where a lot of gold is hidden in a Ute Indian reservation. More Native Americans. He said that he had almost gotten killed over these mines as a young hunter because they found the mines with all this gold in it on the Ute reservation land and had gotten a gun drawn on them. But he knows where they are, and he knows in his heart this is the gold that God has purposed for the rebuilding of his temple. And then we go back in time and learn the story of Brigham Young, Joseph Smith, or actually Brigham Young, and these very Native Americans. So Brigham Young had met a Ute chief by the name of Wakira, and he had told Brigham Young about these nearby mines in the reservation land, and the chief told Brigham Young that these were destined to be used for a religious or church purpose, and that only one white man could ever know the mine's location. So evidently Mark is one of the chosen ones that would know about this ancient mine, set of mines, locations. Yeah, that's what we're going with. And meanwhile, in the days of Brigham Young, they actually used some of the gold of this to make coins with Brigham Young's image on it, because literally at one point the Mormons were trying to take over the U.S. government or form their own government, so they had these coins with Brigham Young's picture on it called Brigham's Bees, and we get to hear all about this. But Chief Wakira passed away, and his successor, Chief Arapine, he did renew the gold pack with the Mormons, but the one after Brigham Young died, and then the other white man that knew about the mines died, Caleb, died in 1869, as well as Chief Arapine. A lot of these people died really quickly, it seems. The new chief, Chief Tabby, really, Chad? Refused to renew the gold pack. And from that forth on, the mine had remained a mystery. No one else knew about it, but until Mark and Gary stumbled upon it as teenagers. Evidently, this is a big LDS conspiracy theory about the actual existence of these mines. And since Mark read these books and then he happened to stumble upon them, he knew where it was. And he felt in his heart it was now his mission to journey into Hebron, into the Indian reservation, to get this gold for the temple in Jerusalem. And so he sets off on that mission. And he found it. He found the mine. It was covered with a buffalo hide. So he just left a note for his wife and took off to go find these gold mines. He finds it. He goes into the mine and he sees at least 500 gold bars stacked up. So these are not only mines, they're hiding places for gold that I guess the Mormons stole from these Native Americans. And For a moment, he let images, he said, of a wealthy lifestyle fill his mind. He saw this gold and realized, oh, I can be really rich. And he picked up one of the gold bars. He said it was very heavy. He put it in his backpack, and then suddenly he felt an ancient spirit behind him that told him to put it down. This is not the time. So he dropped the gold in fright, and then quickly picked it back up and put it back on the stack. Then the spirit moved forward and motioned. Mark said he looked at where the spirit was pointing, and the spirit shows him a picture of the man that's now president or prophet of the Mormon church and says, yo, this gold has to stay hidden until this man becomes president. And so he leaves and immediately resigns himself to wait until this man is president to go back for this gold. Then we flash forward. All this stuff that I thought was actually Mark going to get the gold was just a flashback. So way to go there, Chad. Big plot hole. You can't even let us know when it's a memory, can you? So after Mark kind of comes out of that trance he was in, remembering those memories, an email dings in on the temple email system, Zoom. And it's a message from the prophet himself who says, you can now go get the gold. It's time to put the finishing touches on the temple. You can tell your sweet wife everything. So he does. Michelle was really happy. And they set off to the Ute reservation to bargain for the gold. And when they get there, he says, I'm here. Mark gets there and he says, I am here to see Chief Milton Natchez. The chief seems to be expecting him, which is really weird. He says, yes, welcome. You must be the Daltons. My people, have waited for so long for this. We know what the purpose of this gold was, and our religious beliefs line up with yours perfectly. And we know that it was meant from the beginning of time that this gold be used to help build the new temple. And you can just take it all. So evidently, these Native Americans have retrofitted 30 fuel-efficient, heavy-duty trucks for the sole purpose of transporting this gold. So these Native Americans were ready for this day. This was their life's purpose, evidently, to have things ready to go for this day. And they just give the Daltons all these gold, and 100 members of the tribe help them load up the gold and in these trucks to send it on its way to Missouri, New Jerusalem. Oh, and while they're loading the gold, the chief goes into even further detail about how his tribesmen were some of the first that the resurrected Savior appeared to in the New World when he came to the New World, and how they were really part of the whole Mormon family. So again, Chad has this thing about all Native Americans being Mormon, I suppose. And they go along to say how perfectly the Mormon vision of the world fits in with theirs. That conversation would never happen in reality, Chad. Anyway, so they load up all these gold bars. They load up a bunch of other golden artifacts into these 30 fuel-efficient trucks, no mention of what they ran on, and off to Zion. I guess it's like that Maccabee bus that we talked about, the Magic School Bus. So, yeah. Anyway, so they leave Utah to go through Wyoming to get across the country to Missouri. Most of the members of this tribe go with them, including the chief. Oh, and on the drive, and they're going on I-80 through Wyoming into Nebraska, then to get into Kansas and into Missouri. While in Wyoming, near Laramie, one thing I forgot to tell you, in this book, people start to teleport, and we start to meet what Chad calls transcendental people that have a spiritual body that can just teleport all over the world and into heaven and back. Yeah, we're going to meet some of these people. Evidently, Mathoni, the Guatemalan Mayan that has been friends with Josh all this time, is one of these transcendental people. Because suddenly, out of the blue, he just materializes next to Chief Wakira when they're approaching Laramie, Wyoming. And he points out a nearby prison that evidently held Butch Cassidy at one time. I don't know why we needed to go down memory lane that far, but there's a reason, because evidently in this abandoned prison that once helped Butch Cassidy, there are some evil spirits. He didn't say how many, but I'm just imagining 3 because I'm imagining these are probably the 3 stooges of the spiritual world. It would have to be. And so they are literally trying to stop this caravan because evidently Satan is actually a character in this book later on, believe it or not. Satan is controlling these spirits to stop this gold from getting there to finish the temple. And so we see the spiritual battle in which Mathoni destroys these 3 spirits and sends them back to the prison. And there's a dust devil, and there's this huge battle, and Mathoni destroys these spirits with the power of Jesus and sends them back to this prison. That's the world we're in right now, folks. So after the defeat of these spirits, we get to Nebraska. It's like we go get this sacred gold that has been, forged from the beginning of time for the purpose of rebuilding this temple that was guarded over by ancient Native American Mormons that at first didn't want anybody but one white man to know the location. Then all of a sudden, Mark stumbled upon it and almost took it to make some money off of it. And then he goes and gets it. And now we've got this caravan of these fuel-efficient vehicles. Don't know what is fueling them. Going through Wyoming. We fight demons supernaturally. And then we're in Nebraska. Only in Chad Daybell's world, y'all. So when in Nebraska, they approach what appears to be an LDS meeting house. And, oh, by the way, also all these fuel-efficient vehicles are also equipped with gun turrets, like windows where they can put rifles out. So think of the final getaway bus in like Dawn of the Dead. They were trying to outfit in the remake. That's kind of what I imagine these to look like, but they're fuel-efficient. And I just can't get over these plot holes. They're so glaring. And they get to this LDS meeting house, and a young couple comes out to greet them. This is over 100 people in these buses. And they said, we've been traveling since early this morning, and we're absolutely worn out. Can we rest here? Of course, and we've got plenty of stored food. So, again, luckily, they just happen upon people that are willing to share food in an apocalyptic situation. So anyway, the Daltons follow this young couple into the meeting house, and he proceeds to say that they spend a few hours preparing lunch meat and condiments so that the caravan members could make sandwiches for themselves when they arrive. Oscar Mayer survived the apocalypse, Chad, and where'd this bread come from? Are they milling their own bread? It's just the amazing appearance of sandwiches throughout this series. Shuram was eating sandwiches. Now they've got sandwiches. Did Hostess survive? I mean, is there like Wonder Bread that's in like freezers somewhere that are powered by the same fuel-efficient motors that are powering these vehicles? Chad, I don't think you have any idea. You could have watched Road Warrior, Chad, and come up with some better apocalyptic ideas than you're putting out in these books. Because none of what you're talking about is making any sense. Mel Gibson, Crazy Mel, had a better grasp of what an apocalyptic world would look like than you do. Because evidently you just find places where you can have sandwiches. And there's condiments too. So evidently they can keep mayo fresh. Anyway, so while spending the night after they had their sandwiches, which I'm sure the women had to make because this is Daybell, Mark noticed a laptop computer because they all have computers, and he sent an email to the prophets saying they were on their way. And so the next night they arrive in Kansas City, from Nebraska to Kansas City. It may not be that far, but to me it sounds like a pretty long journey, yet they make it by the next night. And Michelle founds her little grandson Daniel, who can't walk because he don't have a leg, or he's missing an arm and he has a deformed leg, but she kisses all over him. And suddenly it appears that these fuel-efficient vehicles have quite the rev to them. Because if you're going to make that trip, you got to be going at least 70 or 80 miles an hour, guys. How fast do these things go? Plot hole. So they go to the temple. They meet the new prophet. They have this huge celebration about them now being able to melt down all this gold to finish the temple. And I just imagine, that final celebration in Star Wars where Luke, Han, and Chewie get their medals. That's what I'm imagining. And so during this celebration, though, Mathoni comes up and taps Josh Brown on the back, and they turn around and they have a wonderful reunion because Mathoni has, been helping Mark, and Josh has been here working with the Quorum of the 12. And Mathoni confesses to Josh that not only is he of Mayan descent, Mormon descent, he's also one of the original Nephites from whenever that happened, back when, Moroni and all that, what we read in what was his name's book? The cop? Mao. Jason Mao. Just like we read in Jason Mao's book. So Mathoni is really one of the original Nephite warriors from that time period with us today. And so, yeah. And so they have this whole conversation and how he's this transcendental being from their distant past and how he's a super Mormon and he's here to help usher in the second coming of Christ. And, but the funny thing is that Mathoni is now concerned that they have to now go back to Arizona. Remember when they were coming through Arizona in their caravan, they stayed with the Hopi Indians who are also Mormons. And Mathoni hid some ancient Nephite plates there, in the same area as that megabus or the bus that never broke down, never ran out of fuel. Well, now he's determined that those need to come back because they're ancient scriptures written by the Nephites, and that's why he had them, and they need to go get them. But even though he's this transcendental being, they go to Arizona in a blue Nissan 4-door. That is Mathoni's only worldly possession. He's a transcendental being that can zap himself from place to place, but he's driving a blue Nissan 4-door. I think the Ultimas are really nice too, Chad. But why would a transcendental being need it? So, anyway, Josh and Mathoni get into this blue Nissan 4-door, and they headed to Hopi land in Arizona to get these plates. Along the way, Mathoni tells Josh that he was chosen from before his birth to be in the Quorum of the 12, and he was actually a transcendental being himself, and he had the same powers as Mathoni. He too could move from place to place, and he could make things move with his mind. So they have this whole scene where Mathoni is showing him how to move boulders with his mind, and Josh is trying, and it's kind of weak and shaky. Think of Yoda training Luke Skywalker. That's what I'm imagining here. But when they get to the cave where he hid the plates, Josh is actually able to move the boulders out of the way to be able to get to the plates so that they could get them and drive them back to Missouri. No thought of being transcendental here. Just, we're going to drive in this blue car. So, along with the plates is 60 gallons of fuel that they somehow had and managed to hide there. They gas up the Wonder Bus, the amazing Wonder Bus, and they drive it back to the blue Nissan. They fill up both of their both sets of tires with air compressor they also had. They fuel up both vehicles and they drive back to Kansas City. They arrive back to Kansas City from Arizona that same night. So this was kind of half in vehicles, half transcendental, I guess. And they make it back to the church administration building, and they give these plates, these brass plates, to the prophet, who then talks about how they are akin to the ones that the angel Moroni showed Joseph Smith where they were buried. He had the little ocular that he read them with, and that these need to be translated and added to the scripture that came from those ancient plates. And so that's what the next few pages of this chapter is all about, is them translating these plates. Because Moroni has a whole translation room built for them that he just built. It has like all these ancient scriptures alphabetized in chronological order, according to the text here, chronological order, that they could all use to translate these plates. And so the Quorum of the 12, the entire First Presidency, the prophet, Emma, because evidently she's the book guru, actually help translate these plates and add it digitally to what's already there. They print out mass copies of these new scriptures, so they're creating, I guess, another Book of Mormon or a addendum to the Book of Mormon, and they're sending them out to everyone to read and rejoice about. They don't really tell us what's in them, so it leads me to believe this is not something that's actually in Mormon canon, but anyway, so there you go, mass publishing. Meanwhile, Doug, Phyllis, and the other 400 people from the Washington, D.C. temple have finally arrived at New Jerusalem. And they pull up into a area that used to be a train station in Kansas City. And he sees Becky and his kids, Emma, Tad, their kids all standing there waiting on them because they let them know via email they were coming. And it's a huge celebration. Everyone's home. And then we are led into how Phyllis, who has no other family, is adopted by the Daltons and the Norths. Michelle and Mark actually take her in. And then we are led to believe there is a blossoming romance between Tad and Emma's oldest son, David, and her. David says he feels in his soul that she's going to be a very important part of his life. Sure, Chad. Once introduced, David said he felt down in his heart she was a very special girl. Got news for you, David. That's not exactly your heart there, bud. But anyway, they have a wonderful dinner together, and Michelle and Mark officially adopt Phyllis into their family, and they decide that maybe that her and David could be friends, and they seem to get along. They talk about BYU Zion, and Phyllis is excited because she was evidently going to junior college when everything fell apart. And so she says, "Can't I go to BYU Zion and have some classes with you?" He said, I'm sure you can. We just have to get you enrolled." And with that, I'm going to end part 2 of Rise of Zion. I'll be back with you very soon. Till next time, Keto Comics.